Will Donald Trump destroy the BBC? This is a two-part question, really. The first is what will happen with his legal case, and the second is, has he exposed the BBC for what it has long been and provided the evidence in a way that otherwise one couldn't provide, that it was very much subjective if you thought the BBC was biased or not, but now, in legalese, the BBC is banged to rights. Let's look first of all at the legal action. Donald Trump has not accepted the BBC's apology and is now saying he's going to ask between $1 and $5 billion. $5 billion is real money. What is it? It's about £4 billion. So serious amount of money that he's asking for the BBC. The BBC's annual income is about £5.5 billion. So you're talking about most of 1 year's income, possibly, to pay Donald Trump for having defamed him. Will this happen? Well, first of all, you've got to look at the court that it will take place in, or could take place in. Donald Trump is suing in the Florida courts. And the good news from the BBC's point of view is that Florida has a very high regard for freedom of speech. And this is worth bearing in mind because the United States has the First Amendment, and the First Amendment of the Constitution protects freedom of speech. There is a much stronger protection for freedom of speech in the United States than there is, for example, in the United Kingdom. Libel laws for famous people in the US are much harder to use to get damages for. So it's a high bar, and you have to show that what is being done has had a cost to you, but also was malevolent. In my view, this will be really difficult for Donald Trump to prove. It will be very hard for him to get that sort of money. But the thing to bear in mind about American courts is that they are very expensive, and even if you win, you don't get your costs back. And this is why a number of media companies have already settled with Donald Trump. They've been threatened with multi-billion-dollar lawsuits, and they've settled for low millions of dollars, partly because the cost of going to law is so gigantic in the United States. Lawyers get even better paid in the US than they do in the United Kingdom, and as I say, you don't get your expenses back even if you win. So the BBC, on that just simple point, would be well advised to settle, which is no doubt why they gave the first element of apology. But it's hard to believe that their apology is very genuine. The letter of the chairman of the BBC to the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee wasn't very full throttle, was it? It was trying to say that we made a bit of a mistake and so on. It wasn't. We're basically anti-Trump, and we got it wrong, and we apologize, and we will now try never to do anything as foolish as that again. And likewise, the apology to Trump has been half-hearted. No wonder he's continuing. And this is encouraged, of course, and this leads on to the second point, by the earlier clip against Trump that made the same point in a marginally different way. The first clip is more serious because it is unquestionably done by the BBC. It's not an external production company, it's Newsnight. I've been on Newsnight many times over the years. It's a program I enjoy going on. It's had some exceptional presenters, has a brilliant political correspondent at the moment in Nick Watt. But not that long ago, it decided to clip Trump's speech to make it look as if he was calling for violence, an in-house BBC production. And this is where you get to the heart of the second point. It's the BBC being banged to rights. You see, many of us have thought the BBC had a metropolitan bias for years. I don't think they're party political. I don't think they support Labour. But they have a view of the world that is popular in fashionable Islington circles. They don't like Brexit. They don't like Donald Trump. They don't like Nigel Farage, much like Boris Johnson either. And that came across in the tone of their reporting and of the stories that they reported. But that's quite hard to prove. It's very much a gut instinct about what you feel about the BBC, what, having watched it, you think is the tone of the BBC. And they could deny it. They could say, no, you're being too hypersensitive, you're being conspiracy theorist. We do our best to be balanced. During general elections, we have stopwatches to give the same time to everybody to make sure that it's fair. We select our audience very carefully for question time so that it's balanced. They could come up with all those defenses, and you could only say in return, yeah, but when I watch the BBC, it seems to me as if it has this view of the world, this BBC view of the world. And these latest reports show that what we have thought is true. And this is the biggest damage to the BBC, even more so than the costs it's likely to have from the Trump legal actions. Because as I say, I don't think they will be paying the best part of a year's income to Donald Trump. I think they will settle in a US court. They will settle in the millions, not in the tens, hundreds, and certainly not in the billions of pounds or dollars. But the reputational damage is, fatal's a very strong word, undermines the fundamental principle of the BBC, undermines the idea that a license fee is legitimate. And interestingly and importantly, it is not only the Trump issue. The Trump issue has garnered all the headlines, but perhaps the most disgraceful issue, far worse than the treatment of Donald Trump, is that they blamed the Israel military for a mass grave in Gaza, which they knew had been created by Hamas. How did they know? They'd reported on it some months earlier. They reported on a Hamas mass grave, which then, when the Israeli forces withdrew from that area at a later point, they blamed on the Israeli Defense Forces. This is really scandalous. And again, they're bang to rights. It's been shown to many of us who thought that they were unsympathetic to Israel, it's been shown that they don't support Israel and they do have a Hamas bias. And some of the people who have watched the videos like this that I put out have reminded me to make this point because actually it is of the utmost seriousness. And this is the issue. There is a BBC world view. And it's not one they have deliberately. It is not one that executives sit around saying, this is what we think. It is simply the culture of the people who work in the organization. That's what they think about the world. It's what they think all civilized people think. And that if you don't think that, well, they're not really aiming for you as part of their audience. And it goes on into the trans issues and, of course, into the green issues, where they have a single view of the world. And this now is clear. It's evidenced. It's fact. It's not just the supposition of people like me who think that the BBC is biased. And how does this matter for the license fee? Well, the license fee is only justifiable in the event that the BBC is there for the whole nation, that it is working for all of us, and that it isn't trying to produce propaganda for one particular view of politics, international and national. There is no justification for a tax on the ownership of a television set and watching live broadcasts in the iPlayer if the BBC is not a public service broadcaster, but is a propagandist. So that hits at the heart of the BBC and is much more damaging to it than any money it might have to pay out to Donald Trump. So where does this leave us? Can the BBC survive? Well, I think it can, but only if it becomes commercial. Because if the BBC is commercial, it then doesn't matter what its view of the world is. You pay for it, you watch it if you like it, you don't pay for it if you don't like it. You don't have to eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream when Ben and Jerry have weird political views if you don't want to. That's a choice you have when things are commercial, and the BBC could make that choice. At the moment it doesn't, and at the moment its position is untenable, but it is not impossible for it to change, and it will be Trump who has turned out to be the catalyst for this change because he's provided the evidence that people like me needed to prove what we had thought all along. As always, thank you very much for watching.